Right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the merciful and compassionate, I'll welcome you in the traditional Islamic greeting, Salaam alaikum, or peace be upon all of you. And I welcome you to this event. And it's wonderful to interact with you on this very important topic. And I really appreciate your time as well as hopefully the vibrant discussion that we will have. And hopefully you can see from the title, Islam and the English Enlightenment, my purpose is actually very simple, to see what Islam's contribution was, and I would say still is, to what we consider as the Enlightenment, but focusing on England. And when we talk about Enlightenment, we are talking about traditionally the revival and the advancement of intellectual, philosophical, and moral thought in the sort of 16th, 18th centuries in Europe, where we saw a reflection on what women's rights, religious rights, human rights could be. We saw also more of a separation from the state and religion, from the church and the state. So we saw, if you like, a reformation of the society. And the question that I'm posing is, why did this occur? And at least from one perspective, I want to share with you evidence. And this evidence now is quite widely available, and I'll share with you some books about this. But one reason for this was that some of the Enlightenment scholars in England actually started to read the Quran. And back then, about 4 centuries ago, translations of the Quran were not widely available. We had some early translations by George Sale, for example, and others, where a few of the, if you like, Enlightenment scholars started to read some of these translations, either in Latin or in the Old English, and they were inspired by some of the teachings of the Quran, as well as the life history of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So that's the first reason I want to kind of share this evidence with you, and also to really emphasize the fact that I feel we are more connected together than perhaps the media portrays. And this is an interfaith week, and I think dialogue with each other is very important. I mean, myself, I was born in the UK. My roots are India and East Africa, but I was born in Chelmsford, Essex, and I went to two Christian schools. Yet I am a Shia Muslim. I recited the Lord's Prayer every morning. I learnt about Christianity, and as Rachel kindly introduced, and overly kind of her, of course, but I have lived in different countries and interacted with a number of faiths. And so I want to tell you that my existence or my life so far, whatever God wills, has been one of diversity. And the more that we're able to interact with each other and learn from each other, as I have, I learned a great deal from my teachers in my primary and secondary school, as well as my Muslim teachers, may God bless them all, is that if we learn from each other, we're able to have a more harmonious society. We're able to advance society. But if we have an attitude of superiority or blame, or that a misconception that one type of group or religion is barbaric, let's say, or one type of group of people should be ousted from society, and Brexit is a prime example of this, where unfortunately immigration became part of the Brexit debate, and it became quite racialized, I felt, where the far right started to emphasize that, we don't want, let's say, Polish immigrants coming from Europe or other type of people coming into Europe. This started to enter into the Brexit debate. But we have to ask that why are people thinking in this way? And my very simple answer before I begin slide one is, I think it's because we do not spend enough time interacting with each other, learning from each other, learning about the essence of our lifestyle, religion, whatever we believe in, because I think we'll find that we have more humanness, more decency within each other than perhaps what is portrayed from the media or outside. So let's begin. And I want to speak for maybe another 20 minutes or so, if you will permit me, and then allow maybe a good half an hour for discussion, because I think, as I want to be true to what I said, learning from each other is most important. So, okay, I've done the objective, so let's skip that. You know, I don't like harp on myself. I think it's boring, but hopefully give some clarity. What are the terms I'm referring to? So, Islam, I am saying, is or defining as a way of life, okay, as revealed since Prophet Adam, peace be upon him, Prophet Adam, and with the frame of reference of being the revelation of the Quran to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the ahadith or narrations of the Prophet, his family, and companions. So there are actually two aspects to Islam. Islam isn't just about what people immediately conceive, that it starts with Prophet Muhammad and the Quran. Islam means submission to God and being moral fundamentally, but submission to God. And that submission to God started with Adam and Eve, if you like, continued with Abraham and Moses and Joseph. So in the Muslim's mind, Islam does not begin with Prophet Muhammad. It begins with Adam. It begins with Prophet Adam. And so already you can see that even the way I have grown up, I've never believed that Islam is distinct from Christianity or Judaism. I believe in all of the prophets, all of them, and I respect all of them. In fact, when Jehovah Witnesses come to my door, I remember when I was living in Australia, even here in Chelmsford, they always tell me, you have to believe in the way of Christ, right? You have to believe in that way for salvation. Or my fellow Jewish brother will say that, you know, Moses and his law is the way of salvation. But whenever people have talked to me like that, I've always told them, but I do believe in these prophets. I do. And they usually get quite astounded because they don't have a further argument. And I think, and I'm not saying that that's just exclusive with my fellow Christian Jewish brothers, it also happens with Muslims. Muslims may say, you have to convert and believe in Prophet Muhammad. But in the Quran, that is not the case. The Quran in chapter number 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, says that those who believe, and those who are the Jews and the Christians and the Sabi'een, who believe and do good deeds, who believe in the last day, they will not fear, they will not have anything to be sad about, and Allah and God will reward them. There's a very clear verse in the Quran in chapter 2, Surah Al-Baqarah. So it means that if we're out there to convert and to convert with superiority, that is not the teaching of God. The teaching of God is to be able to respect the fact that we have different beliefs. And as long as they are connected to God and searching for God and searching for truth, that journey should be respected. That is why Islam respects all of the prophets, because we're respecting the revelations and ways that all of the prophets wrote. That is different to Islamic civilization, which is the complete breadth of arts, humanity, science, culture, and way of living present in Islamic countries in the past and now. Now, Islamic civilization, yes, there may be something wonderful about it. I mean, you see, for example, Avicenna or Ibn Sina advanced a book of medicine in the 10th century, or Khaji Nasruddin Tusi made advances in astronomy in the 13th century. But that is different to the essential teachings of Islam, because Islamic civilization also includes Ottoman Empire. It also includes many other facets. Even today, we have Middle Eastern countries that proclaim to say that they are part of Islamic civilization, which is fine, but at the same time, rights in Middle Eastern countries are not always respected. Human rights are not always respected. Minorities' rights, women's rights are not always respected in parts of the Middle East. So Islamic civilization is something to be respected, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the core teachings of Islam, and that is, of course, with anything. The Enlightenment is the period during the 17th to 19th centuries, as I've already explained, regarded as a kind of intellectual, moral, and scientific awakening for Europe and the West. And when we talk about the West, we're talking about, apparently, and I think it's very difficult to talk about the West as something very specific, because even Australia is regarded as part of the West, though actually is positioned in the East, in the globe or in the world. So it's very contradictory kind of statement. But the West, we say, is a geographically, supposedly, or grouping of countries that have some uniformity of religion, culture, and law and way of life. Traditionally, it was known as the Christian West or Latin Christian West, but usually this term is not used now. But you will find books maybe 50 years ago or a century ago use the term Christian West, but this is not in vogue now, because simply because of globalization and pluralism. There's a lot of different religions in the world, and even in the UK, Christianity is on the decline as well. In fact, Islam is on the rise, but interestingly, agnosticism and atheism is also on the rise. So you can't just say that a region is defined by one kind of a term, okay? And if we continue, what has been British and Western attitudes towards Islam, okay? Well, let me be very honest with you, and this is from a number of sources and newspaper articles that I've read, and I'll give you the references for all of these things afterwards, but Islam has traditionally been seen as a reactionary, out of place, infidelic, backward, and barbaric religion, a kind of religion associated with terrorism. If somebody that is not widely read on Islam and they see the news, they think, okay, Islam is about cutting the hands of the thief and keeping women inside houses, okay, as a very backward religion, failing to adapt to the world. Islamic civilization has not contributed anything to the West, which, as I'm going to show you, is actually false. And Islamic law is very stagnant, inflexible, and lacks creativity. We'll assess these statements, but I'm just telling you what is widely reported in the media and a number of books in the library, actually. Where did the roots of this misconception actually start? Saint John Damascene, who was a 7th century monk and priest, said that Islam was copied from the Old and New Testament. In actual fact, this is untrue. Yes, as I've said, there is a connection, no doubt, between the Bible and the Torah, and the stories are similar. And for example, Muslims believe in all the prophets, but it is a distinct book, revealed in an eloquent Arabic, revealed in Arabia, which still today people have tried to challenge and say, let me try to produce an Arabic like the Quran, but they have failed to do so. So all Muslims believe, and it's not just Muslims, even you will see this a couple of years ago, the University of Birmingham found the earliest manuscript regarding the Quran, and they actually compared it to the statements of Muslims and the Arabic of the Quran, and they concluded that even within the space of, let's say, 100 years, the Arabic of the Quran had remained true to its original revelation. So that was, if you like, scientific proof given a few years ago. So nobody has been able to forge the Quran, and the Quran hasn't been changed, actually. So this is a historical fact. So something interesting to think about. The Christian clergy and artists in Andalus, in if you like, original Spain at that time, around the 12th and 13th centuries, they made paintings of Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, as a licentious Arab. That means as a kind of sexual Arab that abused women and just had many relationships, right? So this is where the current day misconceptions about the Prophet started from, if you like, 7th century, even 12th, 13th century. What heightened this was the Crusades, where, of course, under King Richard and under some of the churches of the time, some of the Christians were told to pillage the villages in parts of Arabia at that time, and also to propagate the notion that Prophet Muhammad was a dark-skinned Saracen, a pagan enemy of Jesus Christ. But in actual fact, he was the cousin of Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ, or we say Prophet Isa, peace be upon him, comes from Ishaq or Isaac, and Prophet Muhammad is a descendant of Ismail or Ishmael, and those two, Isaac and Ishmael, or Ishaq and Ismail, peace be upon them, were sons of Prophet Abraham. So they're actually cousins from the same lineage. So this was a false propaganda, actually. And there was a fear that Islam would take over Christianity, and these things laid the foundations for the present day Islamophobia that we see. And just to give you some proof of this, there was a report in BBC News not long ago, 20th September 2019, only about a year ago, where it was reported that an independent parish councillor who stated he had worked on Boris Johnson's 2012 mayoral campaign posted, "Islam is the religion of hate, and Muslims hate equals free speech." Other incidents included individuals posting comments such as Muslim scum, something I have been told actually when I went to university, my first day, freshers day, somebody called me a very similar thing actually. Comments such as Muslim scum, and I don't want Muslims in this country. So you can imagine that 2019, still Islamophobic comments are being said and being posted. And look, I'm being very honest with you. I'm very proud, to be British and Muslim and Indian. I'm proud of having grown up in this country. I'm proud of the education my schools gave me. It doesn't mean to say that Britain is perfect. It has a colonial history. It subjugated my ancestors in India, okay? It doesn't mean to say that Islamic history is perfect. It doesn't mean to say that Muslims' behavior is perfect, right? Take the example of France as an example, right? Not just very recently, we had the unfortunate incident where a school teacher was beheaded for, showing cartoons, derogatory cartoons about Prophet Muhammad. Now, freedom of speech, freedom of expression must be defended. Everybody has a right to express themselves, but we should be sensitive to what we are showing. I should be sensitive when I'm speaking to you, and I know it's a difficult subject, but I'm doing my best to be very sensitive to you and just being honest about how my heart feels, right? So every person must be sensitive, but it doesn't give somebody the right to behead someone. It doesn't give the right to engage in violence. What should have happened was dialogue, right? If somebody felt offended, and the teacher should have been sensitive about it, but if somebody was offended, then that person shouldn't go and behead. We should engage in dialogue, right? We should say, well, what's the history of these cartoons? Why are you showing these cartoons? And please also remember, I read some reports about this. Please correct me, and you might have read more than me, but whatever I could find about what happened in France, we don't know why these things were shared. If it was an educational tool, right, to, for example, educate people that look, this is something barbaric. Like, for example, if I were to, tell my daughter that, look, this cartoon is a bad cartoon for you, and those of us who are parents, not all cartoons are good cartoons, right? You can have rude words. There could be certain images and themes there. And if I tell my daughter, look, I'm educating you that don't watch this cartoon because it's a bad cartoon, that's a tool of education. And then I say, look, don't now watch this cartoon. Now, if it was done in that manner, then that is a noble objective, actually. And if people are mature in that class, that's a very noble objective. So again, we don't know the reasons of why it was shown. But of course, any person that begins to show these cartoons has got to do it sensitively. And it's got to know that it's going to offend Muslims. So as I said, that yes, I'm British, or I'm Muslim, or you have different backgrounds, doesn't mean that our history and our actions are perfect. We must always learn from each other and reflect about our existence. Let's continue on. Let me give you just some examples again, to show you in history how people thought about Islam. Kant, Immanuel Kant, those of you maybe who are academics in the audience, or know your Western history and philosophy, you know, Kant is revered. I've read some of his works. Yes, I respect his works, no doubt. Highly influential philosopher. But unfortunately, he had a very condescending attitude towards Islam, and a totally wrong attitude towards Islam. One of these scholars, Almond, and I have his book in the bibliography, states, not merely because it illustrates what Kant will come to represent for Islam in this chapter, a central figure in the Enlightenment footnoting of Islam, a pivotal stage in the rationalist reductionist of the Muslim Orient, to a curious appendix, an eccentric cross-reference, a pair of problematic parentheses. So what he is saying, and people who have researched Kant are saying, that Kant looked at Islam as a very minor footnote in history, as something not very important. Whereas, in fact, we have a whole breadth of philosophy, a whole science and history of jurisprudence, of philosophy, of science itself, contributing to the Enlightenment period. And some examples I've already given you before of medicine and philosophy and astronomy. Kierkegaard, you know, very famous philosopher, and some of his works are amazing. But he said that the relationship is as follows. These are his words: Christianity is the actual proprietor who sits in the carriage. Judaism is the coachman. Mohammedanism is a groom. They didn't even used to give respect to saying Islam. They used to say Mohammedanism as if it was some kind of cult. Mohammedanism is a groom who does not sit with the coachman but behind. So again, Islam is something behind, you know, kept behind closed doors. He also says Muhammad protests with all his might against being regarded as a poet and the Qur'an as a poem. He wants to be a prophet. I protest with all my might at being regarded as a prophet and want only to be a poet. So again, you can see that even the Enlightenment philosophers, they did not actually research Islam when they should have. If they're going to talk about it, they should research it. That is their duty. They shouldn't talk about something they don't know. So this is again further proof to you as to how Islam was regarded. There were others that kind of reviewed some of these things a bit better, like Hume and Edward Gibbon. They had some more wonderful, I would say, more objective things to say about Islam. But now let's go on to the focus of this lecture, having given this background. What happened in the English Enlightenment, right? So in England, you have people like Henry Stubbe, right, who actually started to read the Quran in the Prophet's life. And these are his quotes. He has a very famous book, which you can find online, The Rise and Progress of Mahometanism, page 180. And I have to say here that his book, if I'm correct, he had difficulty publishing it because he was trying to talk about Islam in a very positive way. And obviously what I presented to you before, Islam was not regarded as positive in the West, in Europe and in England. But when he read the Quran and the life history of the Prophet, this is what he said. He said, Prophet Muhammad revived an old religion, not to introduce a new one. It's exactly what I said. It's exactly the Muslims believe. We do not believe that the Prophet brought something new. We believed he revived the teachings of Adam. He revived the teachings of Jesus and revived the teachings of Moses. He taught his followers to abolish idolatry everywhere, and that all the world was obliged to the profession of these truths, that there was one God, that he had no associates, that there was a providence and retribution hereafter, proportionate to good or ill actions of men, just as the Jews thought themselves obliged to bring all mankind under the observation of the law of nature contained in the 7 precepts of Noah, but that all mankind were to be forced to the profession of his religion is a falsehood. So what he's basically saying is that Islam was connected to the earlier religions, that it encouraged morality, accountability of actions, the nature of the hereafter, and the fact that he was forcing people to Islam. No, that's absolute false. He wasn't doing that. So even somebody that is not a Muslim picked up on the original teachings of Islam. Edmund Burke said the principles of the Mahometans are binding upon every person from the crowned head to the lowest being that creeps upon the earth. Islam didn't look at classes as being supposed to be formed upon the law of God himself. And then he says at the end that Islam contained the most learned and most enlightened jurisprudence that ever were in the world. So he actually looks not just at the religion, but looks at the contribution of Islamic civilization in law and jurisprudence to the world. And I'll give you some examples of this. But first, I'm just sharing with you how in the English Enlightenment, what was happening in England was that a few of the Enlightenment scholars were reading about Prophet Muhammad's life. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the religion of Muhammad or Mahomet is more adapted to call forth all the energies and practical enthusiasm of the human heart, something a bit more spiritual. In fact, Muslims will tell you, although still this issue of ritualization and not always understanding Arabic is there, but Muslims by and large will tell you that when you read the Quran, whether it's in Arabic or English, it revives the human heart. You know, when, for example, you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Just take these two words. You say, in the name of God, the merciful, compassionate, praise belongs to Allah, Lord of all the worlds, Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The merciful and compassionate, or you can say affectionate. Muslims recite these things 5 times a day, and in fact more. We are introduced to the merciful aspect of God that is meant to revive our heart and revive our actions. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge picked up on this actually. So you can again see that others looked at some of the more enduring attributes of God and how they revive the human heart. I'm not going to go into that. It's a poem by Coleridge. Mahomet, we don't have time, but you know, this is there for you to read, and you can look at it on Google. Maybe this presentation can be shared. I'm very happy to share this presentation if you want. I can give it to Rachel and she can share it, or somehow we can make it available. Okay. What was happening in English society? Why did these Enlightenment scholars start reading about Islam? Well, the Anglican state, because at that time it was an Anglican state, the Anglican Church had much more of a ruling authority in England. The Anglican state banned Unitarians, Quakers, Catholics, and anti-Trinitarians from holding public office, obtaining legal preferment, and earning degrees from Oxford and Cambridge. You just have to look, and I put some reference there, as my background is law. Look at the Corporation Act 1662, the Test Act 1673, which remained in effect even after the 1689 Toleration Act. So we had legislation which said, for example, a Unitarian in Christianity meant somebody that believed in one God, who did not believe that the Son of God was Jesus. So in fact, it's the same as Islam, same as Judaism, that you believe in one God. That was the original form of Christianity. So there was a sect which existed called Unitarianism, and Unitarians believed in one God, but they were not allowed to hold public office. You could not become a minister, you could not work in the government, and you could not earn degrees from Oxford and Cambridge. And it's quite surprising when I read this, because you would think that Oxford and Cambridge, of course, very respectable universities, were advanced, but they were not. There were racial elements there, and there were prejudicial elements there in history. Also in English society at the time, I'm talking about 16th, 17th century, there's a lack of property rights for women. Women could not own a house. Now today they can own a house. We take it for granted, right? Or I have a joint ownership, with my wife, for example, for my property, and maybe you do as well, right? It's a very common thing. Now, the things that we take for granted today, which are wonderful advancement, which England has made, no doubt, and that is why I have respect for the country, but it wasn't like that in history. And so what was happening, if you look very carefully, what was happening was the Quran's essential teachings were bringing out equality between men and women. And let me give you some examples. This is what influenced Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Edmund Burke, Henry Stubbe, etc. Take this verse, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which is in Surah Al-Hujurat. Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ خَبِيرٌ. O humankind or mankind, indeed we created you from a male and a female, right, acknowledging the status of a female, and made you nations and tribes that you may identify yourselves with one another. Indeed, the noblest of you in the sight of Allah or God is the most God-wary amongst you. Indeed, God is all-knowing, all-aware. So when you read their works, they were attracted to these very egalitarian or verses, right? Just take one more example. The emphasis on justice, which is there throughout the Quran actually. O you have faith, be maintainers as witnesses for the sake of God of justice, and ill-feeling for a people should never lead you to be unfair. Be fair, that is nearer to God-wariness, and be wary of God. Allah is indeed well aware of what you do. That means throughout the Quran, justice, honoring of people's rights, whether at a community level, whether at a society level, that we are respecting to each other's rights to such an accurate degree. The Prophet respected rights of orphans, the rights of his community members, to the extent of respecting even voices, different types of voices and opinions within the community. Even when courts were set up, a hearing would take place that would be equal amongst all. So a lot of these things, as I said, were inspired from the Quran, and which inspired these English Enlightenment writers. Let's move on, actually. The other thing they were inspired about were the treatment of minorities. So, for example, and I'm just ending in a few slides because I want to open it up for discussion. In Prophet Muhammad's covenant with the Christian monks of Mount Sinai, you can see the reference there. It's a wonderful book edited by John Andrew Morrow. He says, a bishop shall not be removed from his bishopric, nor a monk from his monastery, nor a hermit from his tower, nor shall a pilgrim be hindered from his pilgrimage. Moreover, no building from among their churches shall be destroyed, nor shall the money from the churches be used for the building of mosques or houses for the Muslims. He respected the institutions of Christianity and also Judaism, because they were godly institutions at the end of the day. There's no need to do any aggressive, as Muslims would say, tabligh, aggressive propagation that everybody needs to be Muslim. No, he said leave them to be. They're worshipping God sincerely, they're behaving in a good way, leave them to be. Very egalitarian. Whereas in England at that time, the respect and tolerance for other religions was not there. There was this idea of a missionary attitude that you've got to convert somebody that is a Muslim or someone else to Christianity. As you know, there was a lot of missionary activities happening around the world. And to be very honest, the same occurs for Muslims, that sometimes Muslims themselves can have a very aggressive attitude that you have to be Muslim. But this was not attitude of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So maybe we can conclude in a few slides. What was the result of this exchange, right, in the Enlightenment period? Well, what you actually saw, and again, these are references there, hopefully you can see that there's a very beautiful article by Monica Gaudiosi. She said that Oxford University would seem to represent the quintessential English academic institution. Yet in its early phases of development, Oxford may have owed much to the Islamic legal institution of Waqf, the charitable trust, because Oxford University started as a charitable trust, giving free education as a kind of endowment, right? So the result of English Enlightenment writers reading about these things was that it influenced their institutions, their understandings, their modes of education. And just one last slide. You can see from just a few bullet points before I end, is in the 9th century, the Islamic scholar Shaybani wrote a treatise on public international law, which later inspired Grotius of the 7th century. In the 13th century, Roger Bacon, Thomas Aquinas were fundamentally inspired by the philosophers Avicenna and Averroes, Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd, who combined faith and reason together. So let's conclude on the last slide, actually. and go to the last slide. Where's it gone? Here. So what do, in my small view, see as the way forward? I think there should be a greater appreciation of the Islamic heritage of the English Enlightenment to see what we have in common. Number one, it is not about security, but about appreciating history. Just as British history or my British education has positively influenced me, and I acknowledge that, so has my Islamic education. And I think there should be more of a realization of how our histories have influenced each other. Two, combining our heritage will help us come up with solutions to resolve conflicts today. And as I gave the example of France, the example of Brexit, I think if there is more sensitivity of how we are more connected, of being sensitive in the way we express each other, not being quick to condemn, not being quick to be superior, I think that society would see less problems and less conflicts. Thank you very much for listening, and may God bless you for your time, and I'll open it up to a Q&A.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that presentation. We have got a few. I've got a few questions here. Imran, I just want to stop screen sharing, then we can bring you up, and my mic won't bounce off your sound. Brilliant. Okay, if you just want to unmute yourself.
I'll also stop recording as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. We've got a few questions